This evening I got a private message from another member of the V-Guitar forum, Headless. Is it Headless? I can't remember. Anyway, Phil, nice dude. I've bought some gear off him in the past. He's always been very pleasant. Anyway, he asked me a difficult question. He asked me, how do you connect your VG-99, or I guess by default also your VB-99, to macOS Catalina? There are some reasons why this is not easy. So Roland or Boss released the SY1000 around the start of the year, and they, I guess around the time Catalina came out not long thereafter, so they weren't going to support the VG-99 with audio and Midi drivers anymore. So things got complicated. Now, I went to Catalina last year from Mojave. I did the upgrade process as opposed to a clean install. So I had the VG-99 driver, the VG-99 driver on my system when it upgraded, and it seemed to be working when I first connected it. So if you've actually got the driver from a previous install of macOS and you do the upgrade, the artifacts of the driver will still be there, and they will partially work. Although in my experience, they created a huge amount of problems with other devices that were connected to the machine, and I don't really know why. I believe that perhaps some part of the driver is 32-bit and some part of it isn't, because some MIDI works on USB. MIDI into the VG-99 works, as I recall, and MIDI out from the VG-99 half works. You can send, I think you can send control messages and you can send patches, but you can't send any MIDI note on off data. So if you want to be using the VG-99 as your pitch to MIDI converter, so you can play guitar synth kind of stuff, then you're out of luck. It won't work. Now, Phil mentioned that he uses MIDI guitar too, so it might be fine for him. In which case, you may feel brave and you may just go ahead and install the driver, but just beware that if you do have other devices on your system, that driver may clash with them. The other thing is you might not even be able to install it properly because it's an unsigned software package, and even if you right-click on it to bypass security by right-clicking on it when you go to install it, open it, I think because of the way the macOS's file structure has changed in Catalina, that it might not install properly. So yeah, at your own risk. Anyway, I've figured out some other ways around it. So number one, the easiest method is just to go analog. I have an additional interface here, an iConnect Audio 4 Plus, and it very happily will receive the analog outs from the XLR outputs on the VG, on the rear of the VG-99, and it works fine. You've got levels for it and everything, like you can set up, and it works. And also the iConnect Audio 4 Plus has a MIDI input, so you could connect DIN MIDI connectors from the VG-99 into the interface. So that's one option, and that's frankly the easiest option. It just works. And the benefit is being able to use variable sample rates. So like if I want to be recording into a 48 kilohertz recording session, then the VG-99 will work properly. Sometimes using a 44.1 kilohertz device in sessions that are not 44.1 kilohertz can cause problems, or it can be a little unreliable. So that's something to consider. I highly recommend that. That's actually what I've gone over to doing now. I've kind of tried to move almost 100% to the SY1000, but when I do want to break out the VG-99 for whatever purpose, it has some really cool sounds in it, and I've spent a lot of time programming it in the past. So yeah, it's good to be able to just plug it in directly, and it's easy to use a regular interface, and it actually ties in nicely with my other kind of rig over here, which is the SY1000 plus the XFX2 plus the ICA 4 Plus. So I can use like the Mac plus iOS, and use the XFX like a kind of hardware plug-in, and the SY1000, and it's all done by aggregating them. Anyway, that's another story. I highly recommend doing the straight audio method, but should you decide that you want to try and use the USB audio and combine it with the DIN MIDI from the VG-99, there is a way. So there are 4 things to consider. Number 1, the audio part. Number 2, the MIDI part. Number 3, the virtual machine part. And number 4, well, the network MIDI. Now I've separated MIDI and network MIDI because to me they're not kind of sequential, if you will. So if you're going to go the USB audio route, just forget the driver. You don't need the driver. It will probably cripple your system. So I think it's probably a pretty good idea to just bypass it altogether. You don't want it in there. As I mentioned earlier, it created some latency problems with other interfaces when I was trying to use them in my DAW. And of course the pitch to MIDI is broken anyway. For me, that's kind of important. And it is kind of important when you're trying to get this thing to work to isolate the MIDI signal. What I mean is that if you create, later when we talk about virtual machines, if you connect your device to a computer, the host, the USB wants to get tied to one of the OSs. So in my experience, you could easily tie the USB to the primary OS, to Catalina. But if you went into your virtual machine and installed drivers and did stuff, then you would get, if you could get it to connect, which I never really could, it would only ever connect temporarily or not at all. But if it did connect to the wrong OS per se, then you would lose functionality on the other. So the whole kind of concept is to trying to control the point of connection with the USB audio if you're using a virtual machine. So now I'm looking at some notes that I made about how this works a little earlier. So basically, if you're going to go USB audio, you can't use the advanced driver. You have to use the standard driver in the VG-99. And so that works system, USB. Over here, the second page, there's the driver mode. There's advanced, wants me to restart, or there's standard. Use the standard and you can't really go wrong. One thing that people often overlook is that you can use standard with an iPad, which is pretty neat. So if you've got a VG-99 and an iPad, you've kind of got a complete, very compact audio system right there. Anyway, yeah, so that's worth noting. So basically, once you get into standard audio mode, if you go into your computer's audio device, your audio MIDI setup and look in the audio devices, you'll see that the VG-99 appears as this two-part device. One part is the outs and one part is the ins. And you can see it's 44.1 kilohertz or 44,100 hertz, if you will. And it's 2-channel 16-bit audio. Now, the bit depth of the advanced driver is 24 bits, and there are arguments about dynamic range and what is more suitable for use with plugins in particular, but I think that honestly, I haven't really, maybe there's something wrong with my ears, but I can't really hear a huge difference. Yeah, I don't know. Try it, see what you think. If you really have to have 24-bit audio, your only choices are either to go back to a previous operating system and with the driver that works, or just go with the analog outs into an interface, as I was mentioning earlier. So that's basically the audio part. That's all there is to it. If you open up a door, so in my case I'm using Ableton Live, I'll fire up, and it's already there. So I was setting it up earlier. But you can see in my audio settings here, the VG-99 is the in, the VG-99 is the out. I'm getting a test tone coming through on the device there on the main outs, which means that audio is passing back and forward between the devices, and it's an 8.91 millisecond round trip. It's really, it'll be fine. So, okay, I'm just going to leave that there for the moment though. So the next part to talk about is the MIDI part. Now, if you have a look at the back here, I guess this requires a little discussion. There are two DIN connectors, an in and out on the back of the VG-99, and I'm using this interface here, MIDI USB interface called the Roland, UM1 Mark II or something, and it's a device with two output modes or two connection modes. It's got this class compliant mode, which it calls tab, and it's got an advanced driver mode, which is called computer. Stupid names, but whatever. I'm using the advanced mode at the moment, and these both work with macOS. If you use the advanced version, you need to have a driver installed. There is a Catalina compatible driver available for the UM1 Mark II, not the UM1 Mark I, Mark II, from the Roland site. and it's pretty straightforward. You install it and make sure that you unblock the software, because every time I've installed it, the security settings for macOS have thrown up a warning, and I have to, you go into the security settings preferences, and you just have to allow the driver to be active. But if we have a look here in the Midi studio of the audio Midi setup, I'll just do a little sneaky unplug of the VG-99 for a second. Okay, have a look here. When I plug it back in, you're going to see it showing there, lighting up, and the VG-99 opens up here on the audio side too. And this is actually the UM1. I've just changed the name of it in the settings to be a bit easier for me to identify in my DAW and whatever. And I put a little icon in there so it looks nice. You can see a VG-99 when I open up there, along with an SY1000 and GP10. Bit of a VG-99, a bit of a V guitar slot here. So yeah, so that's connected now. That is the version with the driver. If I turn this into the other mode, into the computer mode, and replug it into the computer, it'll pop up with a new box here that'll say UM1. Okay, and you can see over here that in a MIDI track in Ableton Live, I can now receive MIDI from VG-99 UM1, and I can send MIDI to VG-99 UM1. And just to get an idea of how that could work, let's just see what happens if I send some program changes to the VG-99. I need to send MIDI to the VG-99, don't I? There we go. Let's try that again. Because I don't have an audio device enabled, maybe. Let's turn them on. Okay. And let's try that again. I'll put it back to channel 1. Yep. Now the program changes are working perfectly. So, sorry, that was just my bad. There must be an audio device selected, I guess, for Ableton to activate its MIDI output. So, with that all in mind, you've now got access to program changes. And one other thing that I'll point out is, let's take this one, MIDI from the VG-99. I don't have anything plugged into it at the moment, but if I use the control strip, the ribbon controller, whatever you call it, you can see there's MIDI coming in on channel 2 over here on the computer, where I've assigned the VG-99 UM1 as the MIDI input. And the pitch to MIDI works. It is received at the computer when you use the UM1 Mark II in this particular manner. So that's MIDI. I don't think there's anything much else to mention on that. I briefly touched on the fact that you can use that with iOS as well. If you have an iPad with a camera kit and a USB hub, you can connect both in much the same way as I've done now with the computer. You can connect the MIDI USB cable and the VG-99's USB cable, and you can have access to both of them in iOS, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and remember to rename the device when you get into the audio MIDI settings. I find that it helps a lot. If you're cool with just having it labeled as UM1, whatever, but I get a bit picky about that stuff. Okay, the next thing is virtual machines. Now, virtual machines kind of suck. I wish I didn't ever have to use virtual machines, but because I live in Korea, well, not so much these days, but in the past, I've lived here for almost 15 years, and we couldn't use macOS here in the past. You couldn't do internet banking or access government sites here if you used anything other than Windows. And Windows XP, DirectX, it was all kind of a nightmare. So when I got my first Mac, one of the first software purchases I made was a virtual machine. And I purchased Parallels, which you can see over here. I'm running Parallels Desktop 15 for Mac. And truth is, now that Korea's kind of developed, I very rarely use Windows 10, sometimes, but I actually find that having a macOS virtual machine from a hub has been really useful, because it can support 32-bit software applications like the VG-99 editor. So each of these virtual machines takes up about 20 gigabyte. So if you've got space, it's good. If you don't have space, well, not so great. I don't know much about other virtual machines. I haven't really looked into them. I know the names of some of them, but that's about it. You might be able to find a free one that can do this. I would stress that Windows 10 does not work with using virtual machines. It doesn't work with the VG-99 editor in this way. There are workarounds to get MIDI to be sent from macOS into into Windows. Like you can use this thing called repeat. What's it called? Midi loopback and Midi repeat. Tobias Ericsson, I think, made these apps. They're pretty cool, but frankly, I could not get the VG-99 editor software, librarian software, to work with those MIDI connections, even if they were being passed through in Windows 10. So I gave up on that, and I ended up putting macOS 10.14.6 on here. So yeah, if you can find a free one and if you can get it to work, awesome. But I don't want to waste any more time on virtual machines, so I'm just going to stick with this. Now, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go into how to set them up because it'll be different for every VM, and I haven't done them all, but it was pretty easy to set up Parallels desktop with the macOS 10.14.6. All I had to do was make a boot disk for the version of macOS. I made a boot disk and I put like High Sierra, Mojave, and Catalina all on it so that I would just be able to quickly install operating systems whenever I needed to. And it took like standard installation time, maybe 30, 40 minutes or something, I think, to do it. And then it's just there. So let's launch it. Once you've installed your VM software, whatever you've chosen, the first thing you'll need to do is to install the VG-99 editor software and librarian software, which of course you will get from the Roland website. Now, we'll just wait for this to load up. I've already installed those. I'll just give a couple of little mentions to things that I've done here. Now, I am actually running this in dark mode at the moment, but I don't know why. I actually think it's better to run it in light mode, and the reason I think that is because it just makes the difference between the systems a little bit visually clearer. So I've already installed the VG-99. Wrong one. Sorry, the VG-99 software that I need over here, and the VB99 software. So here we've got the editor and the librarian, and there's the VG-99 editor. I've put the menu. What do you call it? Menu bar. The app bar. It's not the task bar. I can't think what you call it. But like in Catalina, I keep it at the bottom, and in Mojave, I keep it on the side. And the reason for that is when I open coherence mode, which is one of the really neat features of Parallels, boom, it pops up over here. And the beauty of that, and you can also see the top bar. That's the menu bar. You can see the Catalina. Catalina shows up at the top, and the second one is Mojave. So having the different colors, just got like the light mode and the dark mode in contrast, helps to differentiate things a little bit, I find. Good for my brain. And that's pretty much it for virtual machines. I don't think there's anything much else to mention there. I think I mentioned before isolating Midi. Now, this leads us to the next point, which is network Midi. Now, you've got your Midi coming through from your UM1 into your computer over the USB cable, and you've got your audio going in there. And you've got two operating systems running simultaneously, and you might even have them in this coherence mode, so it looks like one operating system, which is pretty nice. And your DAWs running too. You know, you've got your Midi in and out, and you've got all your audio inputs. You've got your stereo input, and you've got your mono inputs if you need them, and you've got your VG-99 stereo output or mono outputs, left and right outputs. You're all cooking. But how do you get the Midi from the primary operating system into the secondary operating system and back again? It doesn't just happen automatically. When you start playing with, at least with Parallels, you'll notice that there's some kind of ways to pass audio between the operating systems. I tried to install a guitar standalone app. I think it might have been one of the Neural DSP ones. Oh, it was Blue Cat Audio. I installed that in Windows. No, Windows? No, sorry. I installed it in Mac. I did install it in Windows and macOS. I was trying to get the standalone app to work as an audio device, passing audio through from the primary operating system, from Catalina, through to the secondary operating system, processing it, and then sending it back, just to see if it would work. It didn't. It was a bloody mess. So you have the same problem with Midi. Midi doesn't have any native, I guess, or not native. It doesn't have any default way of getting from operating system A to B and back. So it occurred to me that since I'd used Midi between two computers before using network Midi, you might be able to do that with the two operating systems running on the same device, and lo and behold, it works. So network Midi, I don't know who's got experience with network Midi, but so I'll just try and explain it in a pretty simple way. Okay, the first thing I just did there was I opened the audio MIDI setup of each of the operating systems. So you can see the light mode one here and the dark mode one over here. The dark mode is the Catalina and the light mode is Mojave. Now within this area, you click on this. Oh, that's not good. There it is. You click on these little globe icons, network icons, I guess they are, and they open up like that. Now, I'm just adapting this. The first thing is that your session, you need a session to be able to send MIDI. You need to have a session on each side so that they can communicate with each other. So you need to establish a session. You can make one like, you can call it whatever you want. In this case, I've just decided to call it VG-99 MIDI. Right. And again, you can see when I turn that on over here, the Catalina appears in the Mojave side, and vice versa over here. I've also named this one VG-99 MIDI, and the Bonjour name. This is like the name of the device, the virtual machine itself, I guess. The network MIDI on the, I think of it as the device name, I suppose is the easy way to think about it. I've called that Mojave MIDI and this one Catalina MIDI, just to keep things as clear as possible. I know it doesn't probably seem particularly clear. First thing you've got to do is activate these sessions once you're in here. So if your sessions are active, you should be able to see each of the virtual machines network MIDI stuff in the directory here. So I'm going to connect to Catalina. Connect on this side. It's also important to make sure that anyone can connect. If you change it to only computers in my directory or no one, you will have problems. Promise you. On the let's say primary OS side, you want to tell the live routings that it's talking to the UM1. So here, as you know, I changed the name to VG-99, but it comes up as VG-99 UM1. You just select that in there and that in there. Make sure you select the right one. Has to be the UM1. You don't have to select anything on the Mojave side. It'll just be fine. Now, once that's established, you can see that they're set, that they're connected because it says over here, participants, Catalina MIDI, participants, Mojave MIDI. They're good to go. I'm going to shut them down. I don't even need to see them anymore. They will continue to operate, communicating with one another in the background. I'm going to open the VG-99 editor here from the Mojave menu, and it should work automatically. There we go. It's getting data from the VG-99. Sweet. Love it when things work. Now, by way of very quick explanation, on the Mojave MIDI side, network MIDI, or general MIDI, I guess we could even say, general MIDI. On the Mojave MIDI side, I don't want to say general MIDI, there's only one MIDI device. So when I go into the setup MIDI devices in the VG-99 editor thing, you can see here VG-99 MIDI. And the reason that this is coming up is because that's the name of the session on this side in the network session, part of the MIDI setup. So we're cooking. Now, just to take it a little bit further, you can see, there you go, what's going on? See you later. Okay, so the editor's there, and I'm just going to go to the patch list. You can see it's all populated. Let's go to my patch 6. You can see it opened up on the device there, and the arrows here, they work fine. All this stuff is going great guns. Whatever you want, it'll work. So this is good. The devices are communicating. I have had a little trouble getting, oh, it's working now, getting the program changes to work in Ableton while the editor's been running, but it seems to be working fine now. It might have had to do with that audio thing I was mentioning before. So this is how you do it. You now have, if we just away from the device for the moment, you now have audio, you have MIDI for your recording or like musical situations in your primary device, and then if you want to get the MIDI editing functionality as well, you use the virtual machine and you can run that too. And that's pretty much it. There's not much else to it. It's a bit of a pain to set it up. Of course, it's much quicker to set it up when you're not going through explaining everything. Like, it probably just take me a minute or two to get it, maybe yeah, a minute or two to get it going when I started up. Just out of curiosity, I haven't actually tested out the librarian yet because I never used the librarian, but let's see if it works. I'm sure it will. There's no reason why it shouldn't. There it is. It opened up, and MIDI. I need to find the, how do I tell it? Set up MIDI devices. Yep. Okay, there we go. Okay, and it seems to be doing something. Can I read it? I never use this, so I'm not really sure what it does. Oh, there we go. I just imported them. So it's got my Godin, which is in Australia, unfortunately. The lap, the bass, perfectly delaps my primary guitar now. I should probably update that. But anyway, yeah, so that's cool. So that works too. Might be useful to you. I've never really used the librarian much. I just kind of tend to work on the device and in the primary software editor. That's pretty much it. Don't think there's much else to say about it. Your VG-99 should now be operational with Catalina. So I wish you luck in your quest for VG-99 mastery in Catalina and beyond. Wow, let's see what happens when we get to Big Sur. In fact, maybe I will download the beta onto a external drive and see if I can get the VG-99 to work with it just for fun. Okay, all right, hope this is helpful. Chat later.